With Black Widow coming soon to theaters, I thought now would be a great time to share my thoughts on the first 23 MCU films, from Iron Man to Spider-Man Far From Home. A lot of movies on my list will seem obvious, but I know I have some controversial picks, and because I expect this video to go pretty long, I'm going to put my ranking in the description below with timestamps in case you only want to hear my opinions on certain films. The MCU, largely thanks to Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, Victoria Alonso, Jon Favreau, and the infamous Stan Lee, rest in peace, has done something we've never seen done in cinema before. They've produced 3 phases of films to weave a connected storyline across 23 movies and counting, and soon to include some Disney Plus series as well. Now, I personally have loved every step in this monumental accomplishment, which made ranking these films very difficult for me. But if you've seen my past ranking videos, you know I take a very meticulous and methodical approach to how I analyze a set of films. This time around, I kept it fairly simple since I had 23 films to work with. I ranked all of them 5 separate times and took a weighted average of their respective scores. And these 5 times were on 1, the story. Now this includes the overall story and plot devices, the originality, the acting, and the villain, and this component had a 35% weight overall. Number 2 is the score. This includes the chosen soundtrack and the original score by the composer, and this got a 10% weight. Number 3 is the visuals. I'm mainly talking about the use of special effects and visual effects, and yes, those are different, but I also consider how appealing the movie is in general to look at. Some use an odd color palette, while others really draw me into the world. I gave this a 20% weight. Number 4 is the action. Now Marvel is known for their fight sequences and sometimes CGI messes, so I gave this one 25% weight. These are superhero films after all, not dramas. And lastly, at number 5 is the humor. This is the most objective component, but still an important one to have, as Marvel Studios allows their directors, writers, and actors to put their own spin on the movie with the use of humor, and this got the remaining 10% weight. I won't go through where every film landed on all 5 of these components. I'll mainly stick to what about the film I enjoyed or disliked, and what made it work or what held it back. But with all that said, let's dive into my ranking and tier list for all 23 MCU films within the first 3 phases. Starting at the bottom, and the only one I have in the D tier probably won't surprise you because it's Thor: The Dark World. This is probably the most hated upon movie within the MCU, and I can't say it's entirely unwarranted. Though before I get into the negative, I would like to say that this movie is a great example of why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is so successful. With this film, as with Iron Man, the Avengers, and the Guardians, Marvel Studios took a risk. They tried to go a bit darker and give a more serious tone. This is one of the few films that really had dire consequences in the end, with Frigga's death and seemingly Loki's. They went for it, and while it didn't really pan out in the end, it did help set up some major story elements for the future. The music was fairly good and the visuals were nothing short of impressive, but there was a lot that holds this film back. First off, the color gradient that director Alan Taylor chose in the end still puzzles me. I mean, sure, it adds to that darker tone that they wanted out of the film, but it's just so unappealing to look at. If I never knew what Marvel was, or I'd never seen any of their movies, I'd have a tough time guessing that this was a comic book film based on the color alone. Color is one of the many tools in a director's belt, and you can use it to make a film seem depressing or scary without toning the color down. The scene of Tony out in space in the beginning of Endgame is a testament to that. Secondly, the villain was boring and forgettable. I never felt scared by him. In fact, his evil minion was way more threatening. There was nothing to this villain for me to really latch onto. No redeeming qualities like Thanos or Vulture had, no crazy powers to excite me like Loki or Ego, and no real philosophy other than the generic "I bad guy, I destroy world." This is bar none the worst villain in the MCU. A villain should be exciting and a reason that I go see the movie. When The Dark Knight came out, everyone was talking about Heath Ledger and his portrayal of the Joker. Sure, Christian Bale got his due praise, but it was really all about the Joker. And the reason a good villain is needed is so that they can inversely parallel our hero and make us root for them and care for them. The only reason I cared for Thor in this film was his mother, Frigga, who I friggin' love. And this leads me to my third point, where not even the lead actress and love interest of Thor, Jane Foster, excited me in the film. She really only came off as an annoying nuisance. I have no doubt that Taika Waititi will salvage her character in the upcoming Thor: Love and Thunder, but as for this film, I did not care for her character as much as I think I should have. The first film focused largely on Thor's and Loki's relationship and their constant struggle, and while the sequel did have elements of that in it, they replaced a lot of those moments focusing on Jane's and Thor's relationship instead. And honestly, it never felt that compelling for me. Overall, I appreciate the risk that Marvel took with this film. I enjoyed the darker elements, and some of the fight scenes were very unique, but the film lacked focus on the things that I wanted most out of a Thor sequel. At number 22 is one I think most people will agree with, The Incredible Hulk. This movie definitely has some things that sets it apart from the rest of the MCU lineup, such as its fugitive on the run story and the betrayal of General Ross and his military cover-up, but at the end of the day, I think this one suffers from similar drawbacks that Thor the Dark World had. For one, the color palette here is dull and unimaginative. It felt like they were trying to make me buy that this was happening in the real world more than the Marvel Universe. And while the love story between Bruce and Betty was way more interesting than that of Thor and Jane, it still felt very cliche in certain moments. The score's tracks are hit or miss with me. Some sound really inventive and add to the feel of the fugitive on the run, while others feel like typical filler music. The redeeming qualities of this film for me are the relationship between Banner and Ross, the healthy mix of special and visual effects, and the inclusion of the super soldier serum. As we see with most grounded MCU films, the military is primarily focused on replicating the super soldier serum that they perfected with Captain America. This film is the first example of that. The movie certainly has some problems, and it isn't the most rewatchable for me, but I don't think it's deserving of a D grade as Thor 2 is, so it takes the bottom spot amongst the C-tier films. At number 21, I have Captain Marvel. This is my first controversial pick, so before you click away, let me first say I was super excited for our first female-led MCU movie. After Wonder Woman blew me away in theaters, I was highly anticipating MCU's attempt at a female hero. But from the story, the character, and the message, I had a tough time connecting personally to the film, which thus made it easier for me to see some of its major drawbacks. The first major one being that in this 2-hour plus film, we never really get a solid description of what her power set is. Her 7 minutes of screen time in Endgame gave me a way better picture of her powers than her own film, and that just doesn't make sense. I've seen countless theories on YouTube and Reddit of what her actual powers are and how they work after her own film, and that's just not fair to us fans. After one movie, everyone understood what Thor brought to the table as the Nordic god of thunder. The MCU fans did not deserve a wishy-washy power set out of a Phase 3 origin story. We got all this hype about how Captain Marvel is the most powerful character in the MCU, even from Feige himself. Brie Larson at one point said she can move planets, and nowhere in this film do I see, oh yeah, she's clearly stronger than Thor. Thor went toe-to-toe with a dying star for a few minutes. Thor killed the Mad Titan, and Thor also has been shown to fly through ships and destroy them on contact. Now, story-wise, I think the acting in her character made a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of complaints that she doesn't smile enough or have that Marvel charm that the other characters have, but they clearly weren't paying attention in the first 5 minutes. She's been trained for several years as a galactic warrior and told to suppress her emotions. Of course she's gonna come off as some stoic hero. I also really enjoyed that we got our first mystery MCU film, but let's be honest, the mystery wasn't so out of this world that it needs a rewatch to completely understand. It's as simple as they come, and at the same time, it comes with a political message, which I do not care for in my superhero films. The music was okay, and the soundtrack was fitting, but they didn't blow me away like the Guardians films did. And the humor is cute, but on rewatch, I don't recall ever laughing out loud, and for the average MCU film, I usually chuckle 4 to 5 times on rewatches. However, my girlfriend was dying of laughter in the theater, and she seemed to really enjoy it, so that makes me happy and makes me think that this film reached the people it was trying to. But this is my list, not hers. One other big drawback before I move on is the lack of true excitement in the action. The only action scene that really hyped me up was the rescue mission her team went on before she got captured by the Skrulls towards the beginning of the film. Everything else felt rather boring or short, and they used the fact that she didn't have her full power set yet as an excuse. I don't care if she can't fly or absorb energy yet. Captain America can't do any of that either, and look at what the Russo bros blessed us with. She could blast photon energy from her hands. That's awesome! I could think of a million fights choreographed around that one idea, but instead they give us this dull train chase scene and this odd fight with her yelling at a Skrull and punching her way out until we finally get her at her maximum power in the end. Guys, at the end of the day, Captain Marvel is not the worst superhero movie. It brought us a unique story and provided us some extra information on the Tesseract, Fury, and the Skrulls, but it's offensively simple and it lacks the excitement that I wanted out of a Phase 3 MCU film leading into Endgame. At number 20 and the last in the C tier for me is Iron Man 2. I'll keep this one rather simple, as I'm sure we're all on the same page that this one suffers from simply trying to do too much in setting up future films. This one centers around Tony believing that he is dying and trying to set up his legacy before he goes. That is, until his dad saves him from beyond the grave. That's right, he's the OG Edith.
Even dead, I'm the hero.
Personally, I liked the villain. Marvel has done a good job with incorporating people that Tony and or his family have wronged in the past to come back and bite him in the butt. His villains really embrace the idea that we make our own demons, which is actually the message behind Iron Man 3, but I'll address that later. The score was in tune with the first, and the action was actually a step up in my opinion. This movie really just suffers from trying to set up too many things. Jon Favreau wanted 3 years to make this one, but Marvel only gave him 2. And considering that, I think he did a great job at delivering a fun and exciting installment, no matter how convoluted it seemed at times, which is why it's placed here on my list. Now sure, you could argue that the Russos only had 2 years between Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Civil War, and you'd be right. But this was very, very, very early on for the MCU, and Jon Favreau didn't have as much help as the Russos had. Starting off the B-tier films, at number 19 is Thor. Thor is one of the most underrated MCU films. It's a great fish-out-of-water story that I personally think they should have looked to when writing Captain Marvel. They did a great job at showing us Thor's perspective so that even when he is stripped of his powers and casted out to Midgard or Earth, he still has redeeming qualities that make us want to root for him. The humor in this film really gets me laughing at certain points, and the characters are interesting, which is a real triumph in my mind. I mean, we go from this alien, godlike society back down to boring old Earth, and still have characters that interest us, like Jane and her assistant Darcy. The music is lovely and royal, and the visuals were really awesome when I first saw them on screen. The final battle CGI has some clunky moments, but for the most part, this film is visually stunning. And the story arc of Loki and his envious relationship with Thor really drives this film home. I honestly really enjoy this one. The only reason that it might seem low on my list is because the others just blew me away more in some other component. Thor was tied for second last in his action sequences because other than that fight against the Frost Giants in the beginning, everything else was a bit rudimentary. But again, I really like Thor, and I think it's one of the most underrated MCU films. And number 18 is one I wish were higher, Ant-Man and the Wasp. This one has a very distinct personality about it. It's not trying to give the most insane action sequences or the most complicated story. Instead, it delivers another hilarious heist movie with the twist that Scott is supposed to be on house arrest and doesn't want to let his daughter down. I think the movie works for the most part. People really seem to enjoy this one and appreciate the lightheartedness after Infinity War, but personally, that's not what I wanted out of this film. We end on this super low note with Infinity War, and sure, I'm fine with a comedy heist film to add some levity, but at times, it felt like it took away from the greater scheme of things. We needed this film to learn more about the quantum realm and to introduce the Wasp as a hero. And while we get all that in the end, the road there felt like a simple journey that got easily sidetracked. Ghost was an average antagonist, and the black market dealer Birch and his men just felt like a waste of time meant to fluff the plot. Now, the visuals were spectacular, and the score is one of my favorites, but the rest didn't hold a flame to the high that we got from Infinity War. If you want to know more about my thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp, the Brown Table put out a video in 2018 that I 100% agree with. You should definitely check it out, so I'll link it in the description below. Moving on to number 17, I have Doctor Strange. So, when I first saw this film, I wasn't a huge fan, but with each subsequent rewatch, I like it more and more. Doctor Strange is definitely one of the more interesting Marvel characters, and while I think the first film was a cool psychedelic superhero film, it still felt very safe. It hit a lot of the same notes as Iron Man did, with the arrogant a-hole gone righteous after an accident, the villain being a corrupt version of the hero, and a funny minority sidekick. That's not to say it made it unenjoyable, but it was noticeable and it took me out of the film when watching. But seeing what Marvel has been able to do with the character in Ragnarok, Infinity War, and Endgame has Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness high up on my radar. The last B-tier film in the number 16 spot is Iron Man 3. Similar to Doctor Strange, I wasn't a huge fan of this film when I first saw it. I felt gypped by the Mandarin twist, and I hated the lack of action with Iron Man. But the more I rewatch, and given now that I can see where the character ends up, I'm really happy we have a movie like Iron Man 3. Seeing Tony have to be a hero and get out of tough situations without his suit is awesome.
Honestly, I hate working here. They are so weird.
I also love that we have an MCU Christmas movie, and the cinematography definitely feels unique. Shane Black has a solid list of action films from Predator to Lethal Weapon, so seeing him take on a Marvel film is something I'm glad we got in the end. The soundtrack has its ups and downs, but the visual effects are among the best for the grounded MCU films. Plus, I really like the story and the message of this one. As I mentioned earlier, I think Marvel has done a great job with Iron Man's villains, and the message that we create our own demons, but they do not define us, is one of my favorites in this franchise. Kicking off the A-tier films at number 15 is Captain America: The First Avenger. This is still one of the best origin story comic book films to date, and not just limited to the MCU. The story is heartfelt and inspiring. It plays off like a drama would, but throws in some pretty awesome action sequences featuring our star-spangled man with a plan. While it's not as funny as Iron Man and it lacks the certain charm that Iron Man has, it still delivers a more touching story that puts a cool comic book twist on World War II. I always love it when a film is able to put an interesting twist on a historical event. I think they adapted the film perfectly from the comics, but that might just be my opinion. I love the soundtrack, and the visuals were a tad better than Iron Man, except for certain shots in Captain's chase scene after his transformation. Captain America: The First Avenger was a huge triumph for Marvel Studios. It was less of a risk as Captain was one of their more popular characters, but they still went all out on delivering an immersive period piece that had a great story, great world building, and was a perfect setup for the first Avengers team-up film. Next up at number 14, I have Iron Man, the one that started it all. I know a lot of people have this one in their top 5, and that's totally valid. It might be in my top 10 favorites, but I try to make this list a bit less biased and a tad more analytical. The only thing that punishes Iron Man in the end is the duller action and less clean visuals. However, I did move it up a few notches on my list when taking into account that it was the first MCU film, and it was actually pretty innovative, like the visual of inside Iron Man's helmet and Tony's holographic workspace. If you've seen my Pixar ranking video, you guys know I love redemption arcs. Stories like Cars and Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender are super satisfying to me. When done well, they really make you care for the character and are able to get you inside their head. These flawed characters that are struggling with some inner dilemma or philosophy are awesome, and I think Marvel really knocked it out of the park with Iron Man's introduction. They made him the star of their cinematic universe, and now Iron Man, a once B-tier comic book hero at best, is more well known around the world than Superman. Moving on to number 13, I have Ant-Man. Another origin story that definitely has some similarities with other MCU films like Iron Man and Guardians of the Galaxy, but that's expected as Marvel had found their formula, and the formula works. The chemistry within the cast is top-notch, the comedy lands every time, the action is a bit more memorable for me than earlier origin stories, and the visuals are stunning, giving us the first glimpses into the quantum realm. So to be honest, I wasn't too surprised that I had this one a little bit higher on my list than Iron Man and Cap. However, I still prefer the villains and overall story of those two over Ant-Man's. Now, my middle pick at number 12 is Avengers: Age of Ultron. I think this is perfectly fitting. This movie is nowhere near bad, but it is my least favorite Avengers film. The trailers played with some fans' expectations, which really angered them in the end. People were expecting this menacing, scary villain, but instead got some robot who made quips thanks to Joss Whedon. I'm a bit in the minority. When I saw it, I thought it was great. It built off the first one phenomenally and continued the Infinity Saga storyline very well, giving us some answers like the Mind Stone being in Loki's scepter, while leaving us with new questions such as Thor's vision. And while Thor's side arc was a tad off-putting, I still think this installment in the Avengers franchise added to all of the characters' growth and had bigger ambitions with its story. It's a tough thing coming up with ideas to follow an instant classic like the Avengers, so I've always been fairly happy with what we got. At number 11, I have Black Panther. My opinion on this movie has gone up and down the more I rewatch and listen to other people's opinions and reviews, but I think where I have it now after seeing the end to the Infinity Saga is very fitting. This movie really brought something fresh with its story, its costume and set design, character arcs, and the villain and his message. It can come off preachy at times if I'm being honest, and again, I don't care for political messages in my superhero films, but Michael B. Jordan's portrayal of Killmonger was so spot on that the message felt more emotional than political. I think the cast they got for this film truly knocked it out of the park and helped deliver an engaging story. There were moments that I was able to see coming a mile away in the theater, and yet it never took away from me the emotion that I was supposed to feel. The only place where this movie lacks in respect to the top 10 are its action sequences and CGI. Some fights were choreographed amazingly and were just simply cinematic. Others felt, forced. It didn't feel natural and it took me out of the film, which is the biggest mistake a film can make in my opinion. All in all, I was really happy with the film we got. It delivered a wondrous story filled with amazing characters and it set up Infinity War masterfully. Kicking off the top 10 is our friendly neighborhood web-slinger, Spider-Man Homecoming. I simply adore this film. Tom Holland killed it, and Michael Keaton gave us one of the best MCU villains of all time. The Vulture was a truly great addition, and they did a wonderful job of giving him redeeming qualities that tangle the lines of morality. In my opinion, this film has the third best soundtrack after the Avengers and Guardians films. It has one of my favorite stories in the MCU about a kid who just wants to be appreciated and involved a bit more now that he knows what he can do. They really make you care for the character and immediately fall in love. You're rooting for him from minute one. Although his perfect introduction in the Russo's Civil War probably did help with that. The humor is solid, it had a natural feel to it, and the cast of the high school students had a great chemistry that gave us this awkward, silly vibe, making me remember my time in high school. But again, the place it lacks is its fight sequences. You can definitely tell they didn't want to overwhelm whatever young actor they landed on, as he would have to carry the film, and throwing in intense fight sequences might have been a bit too much. I don't know. They went easy on the action so that they could focus on the sentiment behind the story, and I think that's fine for the first MCU Spidey film. I also love that they skipped the whole Ben Parker story beat and instead incorporated Tony as Peter's role model and conscience in the film. It really helped add to that feel of a cinematic universe. Now, all these things made for a wonderful and near flawless MCU film, putting it at the #1 spot amongst the A-tier films on my list. Now, starting off the S tier at number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. After the first one became an instant classic, Marvel knew they had to go bigger with higher stakes, more meaningful and intense action, and more emotional weight. And I think James Gunn and the cast did a remarkable job at bringing us a new installment in the franchise. When I first saw it, I thought, that was okay. But the more I watch it and look at it as a new adventure with the characters that we love rather than just another sequel, the more I love it. Its humor hits and offers a variety of goofiness and cleverness. The action was way more in tune with what I wanted out of a cosmic MCU film, and Kurt Russell's portrayal of Ego was spot on. The soundtrack was another great list compiled by James Gunn himself, building off the success of how the first one utilized classic hits going as far back as the 1960s. I really love the story of Quill and his unknown origins on his father's side. That mystery really excited me after the first, and it hyped me up for Volume 2, and I think they paid it off tremendously. I also love that the relationship between Gamora and Nebula got some time to grow. The whole group had their relationship evolve, in all honesty. I always say that in the first one they become friends, but in the second they become family. Now, I'd say the main drawback of the film is the threat of the Sovereign. We don't really know what makes them tick other than that Rocket pissed them off by stealing some high-tech batteries.
He stole Anulak's batteries.
They're called Harbulary batteries.
Oh, they're not!
But because I know this isn't the last we've seen of them, I don't mind that their arc wasn't wrapped up. The film put most of its focus on Quill and Ego, and at the same time helped set up the Sovereign for the third film, as well as their secret weapon, Adam. And that's about as perfect as a superhero flick can be without getting too convoluted. However, if their involvement tied in a bit more to the overall story and theme of the movie, that being family, I think this film might have actually outdone the original. Which leads me to number 8, Guardians of the Galaxy. While I love Guardians 2, the original is still so impressive. They are able to give 5 characters unique introductions and clever arcs and interweave them into a fabulous story of how they become a team. All the while, this one gives us another look at Thanos, introduces the 4th Infinity Stone, and gives us some background on Thanos' minions and daughters, Gamora and Nebula. It starts off amazing story arcs for these characters and delivers a hilarious adventure team-up film. James Gunn's use of music gave the superhero genre a new flair and brought to life a team that no one knew or cared about that now everyone is crazy about. I think the 2 films we've gotten so far both have their things that they do better than the other, but in the end, the charm and the perfect setup of the first one puts it just ahead of its sequel. Moving on to number 7, I have Spider-Man Far From Home. This has gotta be my favorite Spider-Man film to date, and yes, that includes Spider-Verse. This is the type of film I expect and want out of a Spidey film. And given that this one resides in the MCU, at least for now, I think it perfectly played off the events of Endgame and gave us a young hero who doesn't know what to do anymore. His mentor is gone, he's mourning his loss, and he is now lost himself. After some stressful days, he's going on a field trip with his class, and while he deals with some more high school teenage drama, he still has a secret double life as the notorious web slinger, and has to help pick up the slack now that Iron Man and Captain are gone.
Come on, there's gotta be someone else you can use. What about Thor?
Off-world.
Okay, Doctor Strange.
Unavailable.
Captain Marvel.
Don't invoke her name.
And with the use of Fury to help motivate him and Mysterio to fog his vision and decision making, we are put into one wild ride. While this film does take some time to get going, I for one love the comedy and getting to catch up with some beloved characters in the first act. It's nice to have a little bit of a break after Endgame, but we still want some action and spectacle because that's what we came for. Besides the amazing cast and Jake Gyllenhaal joining the group as the perfect Quentin Beck aka Mysterio, this film has one of the best soundtracks and scores, the action choreography is great, and the visuals and cinematography only improve it further. The story is fairly simple, but the plot devices they use are able to provide some complexity, like the mystery behind how Quentin was inevitably pulling off these crazy illusions. All in all, this film is awesome, and after multiple viewings, I still crave more. Now at number 6 is The Avengers. This one became an instant classic for a lot of people such as myself. I told my friends and family that this film was going to break records and be a huge deal, yet none of them really believed me. Lo and behold, The Avengers came and went, breaking records at the box office and adding fuel to the fire that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The ability to create so much story in between tons of action sequences still impresses me and is nothing short of a miracle. I think Joss Whedon handled this film extremely well. A lot of people don't know this, but it was actually Joss's idea that if Marvel is going to do a cinematic universe and move forward, then there should be a looming threat to work up towards, and thus he suggested Thanos, and I'm sure Feige jumped at that idea. The movie is magical in so many ways for me. My older family and friends had the chance to grow up with Star Wars and other classics like Jurassic Park and Indiana Jones. I am just so grateful that I got The Avengers. The story isn't anything super complex, but it didn't need to be. It was already incorporating so many elements from the 5 movies before it and bringing together an awesome arsenal of actors. The visuals were spectacular and still hold up today, except for a few moments. In a way, I prefer some of the effects in this one because they are more practical than recent ones like Infinity War and Endgame. Those two had practical special effects, but with all the secrecy and cosmic elements, a lot of it was done by CGI. Which there's nothing wrong with CGI, but if I had the choice, I think practical would be preferable as it comes off as more real and immerses me into the world a bit more. Aside from all that, I thought Loki made a great second appearance as a villain aided by Thanos' Chitauri army. I loved the humor and side plots such as why S.H.I.E.L.D. was looking into how to nuclearize the Tesseract, and the score. This movie gave us one of the best musical themes to date. Honestly, this film is barely rivaled. However, there are 5 that slip through the cracks. Starting off the top 5 is Thor Ragnarok. This movie was such a blast to see in the theaters, and no matter how many more times I rewatch it, it has stayed in my top 5 since. This movie brings such a new angle for the Thor character that for some reason works. You wouldn't expect the God of Thunder to be the main character in a comedy, and yet here we are. Now to be fair, I think Chris Hemsworth and Taika Waititi found the perfect mix of serious and funny for Thor to make this film work, but you can definitely tell that they had a blast making it, which made us all enjoy watching it. The score is great, breathing new life into the franchise, and the colors definitely popped. There's also a good amount of emotion in this film, continuing the tense relation between Thor and Loki, and as you have seen, Taika almost upped the color palette, and it didn't detract from the sentiment or the action. It enhanced it in a new way. This film definitely felt similar to the Guardians ones in a way, but it had enough uniqueness to not feel like a cheap rehashing. It was its own thing. I love the story. The film was actually one of my most anticipated MCU films because I love the story of Ragnarok in the comics and the Norse mythology, and I was excited to see where Marvel was going to take it. And I think they pulled it off for the most part. Ragnarok has major repercussions for the galaxy, so they managed it in a way that didn't take too much from the looming threat of Infinity War, while at the same time completely rebooting the Thor franchise. Now, a lot of people complained about the balance of humor and seriousness, saying that they went for cheap jokes at the expense of the story or emotion or even the action. I personally never really felt that way. The movie is consistent with its delivery, which is about as much as you can ask for from a comedy. Overall, I was ecstatic about this film. I love the direction they chose to go with Thor's character and the story of Ragnarok, plus it gave us Hela, one of the best MCU villains to date. This movie is super rewatchable for me with great comedy, great visuals and music, and fun action. Moving on to number 4, I have Captain America: Civil War. This is one of those movies we've been asking for so long. But something that bugs me though are the people who call it Avengers 2.5. It's a Captain America movie. It centers around him and his relationship with the brainwashed Bucky, who for unknown reasons actually saved Cap's life at the end of The Winter Soldier. Cap, Sam, and Bucky want to save the world from more Winter Soldiers that were experimented on because that's what they think Zemo is up to. But in the end, Zemo just wanted to watch the Avengers fall. He outsmarted them and is one of the few villains who actually won in the end. Now, of course, with the cinematic universe of heroes, we always question, well, where is Thor? Where is Iron Man? Where is Hawkeye?
What about Thor?
Off-world.
Okay, Doctor Strange.
Unavailable.
Captain Marvel.
This movie is awesome because, well, they're all here. But Zemo's master plan actually uses that against them. One reason I think Phase 2 is a very strong phase is that in Iron Man 3, Thor 2, and Captain 2, they are all isolated in new places. Not one film in Phase 2 takes place in New York. They might have a scene or two there, but they're all set in different places. But of course, people still complain about them all happening in New York, and likewise, people will call this film Avengers 2.5 because sometimes people suck.
Some people suck.
Anyways, moving on from my mini rant, this movie is awesome and we can all agree this film is MCU action at its peak. It's grounded with huge stakes that make for tremendous repercussions for the entire world, nay, universe in the end. The score breathes life, the visuals are as good as they can be, and the humor is balanced remarkably well. If this film is your number 1, I don't blame you. But above it at number 3 is Avengers Endgame. Going into this one, there were 3 things I wanted. I wanted to see the dark and depressed state of the world after Infinity War, I wanted to see how they would use time travel to carry out their mission, and I wanted some awesome payoffs for the 21 films before it with some awesome action. And I got all 3. I thought the visual effects were awesome and all the callbacks were smart, funny, and or badass. I love the music. People always talk about portals, but for me, the real hero, Arrival, and No Trust are the unsung heroes of that soundtrack. Also, the musical callbacks like in So Many Stairs to the first Avengers film, and once again, the Captain leitmotif in Worth It reminds you how truly remarkable the storytelling is here. Obviously, the visuals are among the best, that goes without saying, and they were definitely snubbed at the Oscars this year. I thought at the end of the day that the story was pretty complex and yet very linear and simple at times. They presented us with a new, correct form of time travel, and they consulted many renowned physicists to help them with it.
And your former present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future.
Exactly. So Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit?
And the way they used it to traverse the MCU itself was about as perfect as it could have been. I did think the humor was not the best that Marvel has given us. We got butt jokes and fat jokes and all around pretty simple, dorky stuff. I thought Infinity War was more natural, even though most of it was just name calling.
You're embarrassing me in front of the wizards.
Means get lost, Squidward.
It's like a pirate had a baby with an angel.
You rabbit.
I bid you farewell and good luck, morons.
You're from Earth.
I'm not from Earth, I'm from Missouri.
Yeah, that's on Earth, dipshit.
I am Steve Rogers.
But with all that said, the fan service that this one provides at no cost to the quality of the film, and this epic conclusion to a 22-film saga, not including Far From Home, puts it comfortably into my top 3. But my runner-up at number 2 is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. In all honesty, I think this is the most flawless, grounded, and well-produced film in the MCU. It's one of the best political thrillers I've seen to date, filled with crazy action scenes from car chases to epic brawls, while still telling one of the best stories in the MCU. By this point, we get the character of Steve Rogers and what makes him tick. And when we learn that Bucky is still alive, we immediately know how messy and convoluted the story would become, because we knew that Cap would do whatever it takes to save the world without killing his best friend. It's one of the best movies, and in case you haven't seen it in a while, here's a brief reminder of all that it gave us, but feel free to go ahead and skip a few seconds. We got this hilarious sequence when Cap meets Sam, this awesome stealth mission on a boat, Cap meeting old Peggy, this epic car chase, S.H.I.E.L.D. being compromised, the elevator scene with Cap's escape, this scene where they get intel while Nat tries to set up Cap on a date, this fight scene, Fury resurrected, this epic monologue, another epic showdown on flying ships, and brainwashed Bucky saving Cap. This movie is awesome. Besides the perfect story, awesome fight scenes, and solid humor, the visuals show us that a superhero film doesn't need to go big and ludicrous to be visually appealing, and the score is chilling and exciting. This film is pure adrenaline that never gives or grows tired. After the Avengers, we were dying to learn more about S.H.I.E.L.D., so the fact that they gave us a terrifying villain with the revelation that the reborn Hydra is in fact S.H.I.E.L.D. was bold and brave. I think the Russos handled this film perfectly and established their credibility, which in the end gave us Civil War, Endgame, and the #1 movie on my list. That's right, at #1 I have Avengers: Infinity War. Surprise, surprise. Now, if you know me at all, even if it's just a bit from this video, you should know by now I love chilling, scary things. I'm a huge horror fan. I appreciate great music and stunning visuals. I love epic action sequences, an exciting story, flawed characters, mysteries, and high stakes with real consequences. There, I basically just summed up Infinity War. I have watched this film a solid 30 times, and I do not tire of it. It's got the best soundtrack in the MCU, the visuals are amazing, the story and character of Thanos and his hunt for the stones to save the universe. It's sad, it's scary, and it's wonderful all at once. Watching our heroes give it their all, even after their fallout from Civil War, and watching half of them die in front of us is exactly why Marvel works in the first place. They are known to take risks, and Infinity War is no exception. They took the biggest risk with this film, and my god if it didn't work. This film is exciting and fires from all cylinders. It delivers emotion that I never expected. I was scared at certain moments, and I've never screamed out of joy louder in the theater than during my first experience with this film. Thor's entrance in Wakanda is forever ingrained in my memory. This film works on all levels, and I'm so happy I got to experience it and appreciate it fully. I listened to every interview that I could find from the directors, Kevin Feige, and the cast, and I was part of the speculation for this film a whole year out up until that Thursday night viewing. The hype only increased, and whenever we got new information or new footage, I was absorbed into this world with my fellow fans talking about this cinematic universe. That's a truly magical thing that Marvel Studios provided for me, and I am so grateful. Well, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed the video and reliving some awesome memories from these amazing movies. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your rankings down in the comments below, even if it's just your top 5. Again, my list is not the correct one. This is just a fun thing to do for us fans. I love talking about the MCU and speculating about future projects. I'm so excited for the Falcon and Winter Soldier Disney Plus series coming later this August, I believe. I can't wait to see what they have in store for us, especially with Zemo's return. If you guys would like me to do a ranking of my most anticipated Phase 4 projects, I would love to do so. If I just get 5 likes, I'll do it, since it'll be a really short and sweet video. Plus, I'd love the chance just to talk about what I know about each project and why they excite me. But that's all for now. I know I've been talking for a super long time. Thank you so much for watching any part of this monster of a video. I'll see you guys next time.